how can outsourcing play a role in supporting law firms with post-completion, and what are the most common misconceptions around quality?
So I think a lot of firms find post-completion challenging, and it's not because they don't know how to do it, but because of how the work is structured internally. A lot of the time, it's a process that often sits between fee earning responsibilities, client comms, lender updates, and other admin. So it doesn't always get that ring-fenced focus that it really deserves. So outsourcing, in our view, helps give firms access to a dedicated team whose entire focus is post-completion. People who follow clear workflows, understand the common issues, and really they handle this work day in and day out. And that kind of consistency and process discipline makes a huge difference to turnaround times and requisition rates. In terms of the misconceptions, I mean, you mentioned quality, but actually the two that we hear the most are quality and control, right? Because obviously you're outsourcing and you often wonder about whether you're going to lose control of the process. So with regards to control, actually, it's if the partner, someone like ourselves, is embedded properly, we pretty much always work on the client systems, right? So you actually, or the client actually has the same level of transparency as with their own staff. Every action is time-stamped, auditable, visible to the firm, so you see exactly where things stand. And then on quality, actually, when it's set up properly and you're partnering with a professional firm, the opposite tends to happen. And by that, I mean, your quality level doesn't tend to drop, it tends to improve. A good outsourcing model brings in structured quality controls. There's things like multiple levels of checking, audit trails, and data validation before submission, because the team is process-led, and in our case, we measure their performance against defined KPIs that we agree with the client. So the quality, they have an incentive to make sure the quality is high, and it is very measurable. So the result is it becomes more consistent, actually, not less.
Okay, thanks, Adil. Which post-completion tasks are most commonly outsourced by firms? For example, API submissions, managing requisitions, lender updates, etc.
So it starts just after completion, obviously. So once SDLT has been paid and you're preparing the submission, the work is obviously, the matter is handed over to our team. The team typically reviews the file to check all the supporting documents are present and accurate before submission. And that's my comment earlier, and something Joe talked about as well, about sort of, when things are handed over at that point, if they're not submittable first time, what a delay that causes. But we try to triage things. We try to check before going through the submission process, make sure everything is there. If it's not there, we'll go back to the fee earner, get all of the documents in. So I guess that's the initial process. That's the initial step of checking. And then beyond that, the scope is flexible, right? Depending on the firm. Some firms, they stop at AP1 preparation and submission. Others, they hand over the entire process right through to the file closure. So we manage requisitions, we update lender portals, we verify the TID. And really that full end-to-end approach is actually where firms tend to see the biggest efficiency gains.
Adil, what measures can firms put in place to ensure outsourced work meets the same quality standards as in-house? Now, that's an important question for law firms.
Yeah, so I think it is. And really it starts with setting clear expectations. Again, it's something Joe mentioned around mapping the process, right? And that's so critical because a lot of firms don't have a process really, unfortunately. So we try to help map out the process, and often just the exercise of mapping out the process results in actually efficiency gains because you know how things stand. But yeah, we'll map out the process, identify any efficiencies that can be made quickly, and then we'll jointly define KPIs and service standards that matter most. So usually, with post-completion, it'll be things like accuracy, turnaround times, target requisition rates, communication frequency. We always recommend combining quantitative measures like the ones I've mentioned with qualitative ones, such as feedback from fee earners. And you have that feedback loop, and that's where you uncover patterns and opportunities for improvement. And yeah, once you have those measures agreed, quality management becomes it just becomes transparent, and you can monitor trends over time. You can adjust the process together, and it is a process. Outsourcing is not something that happens outside your firm. The way we operate very much is as an extension of the firm or an extension of your team. So we will work with the internal teams to provide all of those metrics that we mentioned and to identify areas for improvement consistently.
Okay, thanks. Some firms worry about language barriers, or if you're a bad delegator like me, losing control of files. How realistic are those concerns, and what practical safeguards exist?
Yeah, so I think so a couple of things, right? So they're pretty common concerns. I think we've mentioned the control piece. I've already mentioned the control piece. If we're working as we do with, I'd say 99% of our clients, we work within their practice management system, and every action is timestamp visible and part of the same audit trail as the in-house team would be subject to. So that is the control part. In terms of language, our teams are offshore. We have a delivery center in Islamabad, Pakistan, and it is a legitimate concern. The way we get around that is by ensuring we hire people with British law degrees. So they're people who have come to the UK and they've studied here and have gone back. We recruit them. They come for their undergrad, they come for their LLB, LLM, bar at law, and they go back. We recruit them, or we recruit people who have done a UK accredited degree overseas. So the standard of communication, both written and spoken in English, is significantly higher, and we see that in the feedback we get from clients, that the comms with our teams is for lack of a better word, painless, I guess, which is a good thing.
Okay, thanks Adele. Any comments on anything said?
It's actually it's really interesting what Adele has mentioned in terms of actually the background and experience and the legal training behind the team, Auxilio in particular, because actually a lot of the kind of like post-completion teams that we tend to come across, usually it is probably less experienced people on this side of the border that tend to work on post-completion files. So whether we're talking about paralegals or administrative support, or maybe not frequently junior lawyers, but actually it probably will be more paralegals, whereas we're talking about probably fully qualified people in the sort of like offshore services, actually being able to contribute their skill and expertise to quite a vital part of the legal process. Very interesting point I've just learned.